Hello, this is my first video and I am going to talk about my dad. In this video, I'm going to talk about three things. How one, my dad is a man of service. Two, how my dad took risks in his life, calculated good risks. Three, how my dad was an example and still is an example of a great husband, father, and provider. So let's get right to it. So I would consider my dad a man of the cloth, kind of like a clergyman, except my dad never got paid for his service. Ever since I was little, he would go to the temple and he would work there every Saturday. And then as he gotten older and retired, he would go there probably twice a week. And then at one time, or actually two times in his life, he served there where he went every day for like 18 months. How cool is that? I think my dad is a man of integrity. What does integrity mean? It means that his actions and his behaviors are right in line. And it's kind of hard to find that these days. And I think that's why we have so much confusion in our own brains, in our own minds, because we're saying one thing, but we're doing something else. And so my dad, he was a perfect example. I can remember during the LA riots, my dad and I were driving. We weren't taking the freeway. We were driving to downtown Los Angeles. And there were just people, like it was just my dad and I. We were in the van and there were just people. If anyone knows about what happened during the Los Angeles riots, they had just, it was just so much confusion. There were people taking out ATMs, people trying to get gas. Even the homeless had grocery carts full of liquor and food, and it was just a mass chaos. People running out with TVs. It was a crazy time. And I remember that my dad, he could have easily, I mean, we had the van, I guess, to put all of that stuff, loot in. But my dad, not that I questioned that he would even want to get anything, because he believed in that nothing is for free and that you have to work for what you get. But it was just a really good example of how he didn't even waver. He didn't even look to the side. He just focused on getting my sister that day. And I think that was a really good example, and shows how he's a man of integrity. So in my religion, there is no paid clergy. There's no paid, no one gets paid, in fact. My dad, when he was young, he went on a mission and he didn't get paid. And so when I grew up, I did the same thing. I learned a different language, went to a third world country, and I lived there among the people for 2 years. And my dad and my parents, they both paid for it. And how cool is that? So he taught me a lot about charity. I remember when I was young, my dad, whenever he saw someone in need, especially like physical labor or something like that, he would, because there were 5 of us, there were 5 sons. So he would always get us together and have, whether it was mowing the lawn, whether it was helping lift stuff or cleaning or something like that, he was always ready to have his children and himself work. So he was never a person to just sit around. He was always anxiously engaged in building, in serving. And that's one of the things that I love about my dad. So that's the first thing. The second thing is my dad took a lot of risks. And a lot of times we look at risk as scary, which it is. We look at it as almost like in a negative way, like maybe, but there are good risks, right? Just like there's good debt. So good debt is like on school, on mortgages is considered a good debt by some circles. What else is a good debt? Getting a car, but not getting like the best car, but just getting something that's functional, something that you can afford within your budget. But let me tell you about the life of my dad and how he took risks. So he was born and raised in a third world country, Samoa. And he left from Samoa sometime in the 70s and came to the United States. And leaving wasn't a very easy thing for him. He left on account of my mother. And he left knowing that he had established everything that he could in Samoa. In fact, my dad was a contractor. He was an entrepreneur, a small business owner. He employed lots of people. He had a payroll. He had a business checking account. He had everything necessary to succeed in that third world. And he had learned all of those skills through service, through learning. And he left all of that in the 70s because he thought that coming to America was an even bigger opportunity. He was already thinking of his legacy for his children, giving them more opportunities to think even bigger. So if y'all ever been to these small countries like Samoa, they're very small, and in order to, the culture is so strong, right? And in order to get out of that, you have to really think big. You have to think like, all right, you have to have goals. You have to have a lot of just drive to be able to get out of that situation. Similar to people in difficult situations here, even in America, to get out of that situation, it could be tough because it's just tough, even in the best conditions. So my dad, he left there, came here to America, and he found a job. He got a trade. He was a truck driver. He did so many things. Now remember, English was in his first language, but he was such a patriotic person that he went through everything he needed to do to get citizenship in this country. He learned the language. He learned the culture. He learned the exchange rate, for example, of the American dollar and how it was different. It was worth more than where he had come from. He learned all of that. And I would say that he knew all of that already because he had been raised by his family. And his mom and his dad, my grandparents, had died earlier on in his life. So he was pretty much built for something like America and what America could offer, because he was not scared. He knew what America could offer him, and he came here with faith. So when he was here, now while he was raising us up, we traveled across the United States. I believe we went all the way up to close to New York, in fact, because he wanted to see how great this country was and the landscape of it. While my dad was raising us up, he had a lot of different opportunities through his career, where he went to Russia, he went to China, and he did all of those things. And it just baffles me because I haven't even been to any of those places. So when I think about it, my dad did more with less. with the resources that he had. There were 8 of us children, and there were numerous family members who also stayed with us while I was growing up. But my dad, coming from this small island, came to America. While in America, was able to go to China for months for his job, and then he was able to go to Russia, which is kind of cool because those are 2 of the big countries, or at least the nuclear countries that we talk about even to this day. Another thing that my dad did in taking risks was he was a small business owner. He took out a loan. He took that risk in opening up a cleaning service where he cleaned almost like a janitorial service. He took the risk, and I don't know how long it was on, but I know I worked, and he did the same thing that he did in Samoa. He had a payroll, he had employees, he was paying quarterly taxes. He was doing everything legit in this business. So this was all while he had kids in college. He had kids serving missions at the time. I mean, it's just wonderful. And then the last thing I want to talk about my dad taking risks is that he was a real estate investor. One of the first things my dad did when he got to this country was he took out a loan, took a risk, and got a mortgage as soon as he was able to qualify for it. How cool is that? To come to a different country, not knowing the language as good as everyone, but immediately establishing roots. These roots would prove fruitful because my dad was able to invest in a lot of different properties. And with every investment, he was able to profit from it. And even to this day, he still has investments. And that's just incredible for me because that became the template for my life on how to build wealth. Was not so much what my dad taught me, but what he showed me and the way that he lived in taking that risk of being a real estate investor. He bought property, he rented them out, he sold property, he paid taxes on all of those legitly. He paid tithing on all of those. Can you kind of see why my dad's my hero? My mom is my hero too, maybe more so than my dad, but my dad was awesome, and he still is awesome. So he took a risk on these real estate investments in the 80s. That's when interest rates were at over 10%, I believe. Right now, I think we're like at below 2%. And so he was buying it at the height of the interest rate. And so that was a big risk because I don't know if I would do it even right now with all the knowledge, with all of the experience, with all of the all of the things that I've read. I don't know if I would be able to do that. In fact, I didn't. When 2008 hit, there was an opportunity to buy, and I didn't do it because I was too scared. So I guess in that way, I was more like my mom than my dad. The last point I want to talk about is how my dad, so this is point number 3, is an example of a great husband, father, and provider. My dad didn't really require too much. He never made a big fuss about food, whether we had it or not. I remember he would always say that, this is how families are. If we have food, we eat together. If we don't, then we starve together. That's just the way families are. I never knew anything about financial worries or anything because my dad had always provided. He always had a job. He was a great leader in our family in that although he had disagreements with my mom, I never saw him get to a point where he demeaned her, where he physically was aggressive towards my mom. I just think my dad was just a great example of a provider. And I always think to myself, if I just had a little bit of what he did, then I would be so much more farther in this life. And I'm thankful for my dad because he's turning 80 years old. And Dad, I want you to know that I love you. And I'm very proud to be your son. And on behalf of me, Amanda, Tessie, Millie, and Reeve, I want you to know that you are loved and that your example, your legacy will live on through us and through all of your other children. Thank you, Dad, for everything that you've done. Thank you for your acts of service to the church, to your family, to your country, and most importantly, to God. Thank you for taking risks in life, because it was those risks that have finally gotten me to the place where I'm ready to take risks. I guess better late than never, right? Thank you for taking those risks, because that's what life is about. I've learned that in life, there's lots of failures. And the only way to experience success is to experience failure. Not to say that you failed a lot. You didn't fail at all in my book. But I think the fact that you took the risks, there was always going to be that chance of failure. But nonetheless, you took it. And thank you for showing us that anything is possible, especially here in America. Our only limitations is our own brain and our lack of a dream. And lastly, thanks very much, Dad, for being a great example of a husband, father, and provider. Those principles of perfect attendance, those principles of doing more than what your job requires, so that you can have job stability, those have been pivotal, important principles in my life that I also teach to my children even to this day. Thank you very much, Dad. Happy 80th birthday. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but I'm gonna come there soon. And I want you to know that I love you from the bottom of my heart. There's no words that can explain and express how much I care and love you. And I will talk to you later.